Good evening. My name is Nannette Monshin, Overley. And I'm going to talk tonight about a beautiful early Chan poem, the Shin Chin Ming, or Song of the Trusting Mind. I just want to share before that, though, I had such a memory-filled walk to the Zendo from the Upaya house, and there were a few cars coming down the driveway, and I just had this vivid memory of these streams of cars every Wednesday night, all year round. And I was seeing the faces of some of the people who always faithfully came, and the ones who came early, and a dear couple who would always come and get settled early in the Zendo. And it was a sea of faces. And now it's totally different. And I was just thinking, it's not actually better, and it's not actually worse. It's just a different time, and it at the same time allows those of you who can't travel down the driveway, every Wednesday to join us. So welcome to everybody. Let me start with the first 6 or 8 lines of this poem. This is a poem that's worth years of study, and I'm just going to tap into some of the things that I think are most helpful for us to think about and bring into our lives. So the Shin Chin Ming starts this way. The great way is not difficult for those who hold no preferences. When longing and aversion are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, then hold no opinion for or against. The struggle of likes and dislikes is a disease of the mind. This particular teaching, we used to chant actually a couple times a week in our Zen center in Santa Cruz. And over the years, I've been working for quite a few years with my teacher, Jean Bush. And every few years, I would come to the end of a particular study of something, and I would ask his opinion of what I should study next. And he kept sending me, I think you should study trust in mind. And after about the 3rd time, I was wondering if it was my particular, lessons that I particularly needed to learn. But I've studied this for a long time, and it's very different to me now than it was when I first heard it. So thank you to my teacher, Jean. And another humorous introduction to this poem came from Pema Chodron, who early on I just listened to teachings and tapes, and it was so helpful for me to kind of, sink into the Dharma and begin to relate it to my life. And I can hear her inflection in this particular teaching when she talks about this poem and holding no preferences. And she said she was in this big room of practitioners, and she was looking around to see if there was anyone else that had her question, which is, excuse me, hold no preferences? How do we do that? And so I can always, when I hear hold no preferences, I think of Pema saying, excuse me, how? And also, for anything that we study, the question also is why? What does this poem, what does this teaching bring us that matters to our human life? So for me, always that's at the center of how I read and study the Dharma. Not as a philosophy, but really, how can we live this and why does it matter? So in my talk tonight, I want to give a little historical context, and partly because it's really, really fascinating. This poem is recognized as the first Chan teaching, in a way, the first Chinese Zen teaching that flows together, brings together the teachings of Buddhism and Taoism. So it's really interesting that way. And also how the Chinese culture kind of folded in Buddhism by relating it to Taoism. And then after looking at the central teachings a little bit, really delving into this question of how do we practice with this? If letting go of the struggle of for and against really serves us, then how do we do that? Because we're kind of wired to our attraction and aversion. The other thing is our vows. The other part of the why to study this, to me, is how it relates to our vows to serve and to do good and to not cause harm. So one first really interesting basic connection with the teaching in this poem is with the Four Noble Truths. So I'd like to just articulate how I see that. Part of the noble truth of suffering is that suffering, the truth of suffering, is association with the unpleasant is suffering, and separation from the pleasant is suffering. And not to get what one wants is suffering. And so the struggle of likes and dislikes is suffering. And then the origin of suffering as craving and grasping what one wants, and freedom from suffering as renouncing that craving, freeing oneself of it. When longing and aversion, this is from the Shin Shin Ming, when longing and aversion are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. The teachings of Buddhism had a kind of a long, slow time getting traction in China. And during the 4th century, there was a time that was characterized by a lot of materialism, as well as war and chaos, which sounds familiar to me in the times I've lived in. But the questioning of the Confucianism of China was ripe in this time because it was a time of chaos. So this view of Confucianism, of orderliness, of hierarchy, of rules, bringing peace and order came into question, and Taoism and Buddhism got a full foothold during that time. And another thing that's made particularly Mahayana Buddhism interesting to the Chinese was its emphasis on serving all beings, because the culture at that time was very interested in a healthy society, not just what one can do for oneself in meditation and reaching nirvana so that I have a better rebirth, but actually how we can serve, how our practice relates to a just and stable society. So this poem, Senkan, the supposed author, there's always lots of questions about who these, even Bodhidharma, is Bodhidharma a mythical figure? how does he land actually? How much historical verification can be made of all these stories, is a question. But the Bodhidharma and Weka, his disciple, and Senkan were part of what's considered the first movement of the historical development of Chan. And there's an interesting thread between the three of them. For one thing, in this time period, it was a small sect, a small movement, and they were wandering monks. It wasn't a time, as evolved later, of big monasteries, but of monks living an ascetic life of wandering. And so, Bodhidharma, first of all, how unexpected and unusual his legendary meeting with the emperor, telling the emperor that all the money that he's given to build monasteries has no merit, and particularly being asked, "Who are you?" and saying, "I don't know." So from Bodhidharma through Weka and Senkan, you can see this weaving in already of Taoism. And it shows up in their awakening stories as well. So Weka, the story goes, appeared outside of Bodhidharma's cave and asked for the teachings. And he was a scholar. And he had studied Confucianism deeply. And what he said to Bodhidharma was, "I've read all the classics, yet this mind is not at rest." And Bodhidharma said, "Give me your mind and I'll put it at rest." Then Weka responded, "When I look for my mind, I can't find it." And Bodhidharma's famous reply, "There, I've pacified it for you." So listen and you'll see the parallels with Senkan, our author of the Shinshin Ming story. He was reportedly suffered from leprosy. And so he came to Weka and said, "I'm riddled with sickness. Please absolve me of my sin." And Weka said, "Bring me your sin and I'll absolve you." Then Senkan, after a long pause, "When I look for my sin, I can't find it." And Weka said, "I have absolved you. You should live by the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha." So this parallel of, I can't find my mind, I can't find my sin, is really part of this central early Chan teaching that says, these are concepts, words and letters, and this will not lead you to the truth. So one more thing from Bodhidharma, which is a poem that he left behind that is really carried forward in the Shinshin Ming. This is his poem. "A special transmission outside the sutras, without depending on words and letters, pointing directly to one's own mind, seeing into one's true nature, and realizing Buddhahood." So these are all foundations of the flowing together of Taoism and Buddhism. This emphasis on direct insight and intuitive understanding surpassing the rational analysis. And also the famous concept or teaching, I should say, of Wu Wei, of Taoism, that our action accords with and respects the unfolding of the natural, the unfolding of causes and conditions, and particularly looking at nature and aligning with that. So this teaching of Wu Wei is parallel to the way we think of Upaya, not as being guided by the mind necessarily, and particularly not being guided by our personal preferences. So a commitment to not forcing, but also a commitment to the welfare of others. And one more really striking parallel between the teachings of the Shinshin Ming is how they're echoed in our Mahayana vows, and particularly the vows that we take up here at Upaya. So first, do no harm. I vow not to harm myself or others, and to live in not knowing as the source of all manifestations. So pointing to intuitive insight. Then the second vow, to do good. I vow to bear witness to the joys and pains of all life and clearly see what is without attachment or judgment. Clear seeing being really defined by letting go of our prior judgments, by seeing clearly what's before us without the lens, without the filter of our opinions and our judgments. And this is a central teaching of the Shinshin Ming. And then third, do good for others. I vow to invite all hungry spirits into my life and commit my energy and love to the healing of the earth and humanity and all beings. So this invitation of everything, all the hungry spirits into my life, is meeting life as it is, not picking or choosing what I'm going to meet, but really inviting life in as it presents itself. And this is what this vow asks us to do. And this is what the Shinshin Ming asks us to do, to cultivate trust that we can meet our life as it arises, and trust not in a problem-solving mind, but in our original mind. There's a beautiful book by Catherine Thanis called The Truth of This Life that Natalie Goldberg edited. And she has a chapter called The Joy of Not Choosing. And in this chapter, she's telling a story about a difficult situation and the weeks that she spent trying to sort it out, trying to figure out how to turn it, how to make it work for her. And eventually, what she discovered is, I can't solve this by myself. I have to just be it. I have to just be it, not solve it. So now to go a little more directly into the Shinshin Ming. The title, Shin, is faith. Shin is also heart-mind. So Shinshin Ming is faith in mind, but this is a particular flavor and understanding of faith that has to do with a faith that comes from directly experiencing, not belief, but direct experience. firsthand experience of the Buddha mind. And the mind, this really puzzled me for a long time. I would, work with this poem and think, it seemed at first to say faith in mind was the opposite of what made sense to me. It's like, I don't really have faith in my mind, because my mind tells me all sorts of, very confusing, very conflicted things. And, how is this faith in mind? So it's also important to really get that the mind that I'm turning myself over to is not the thinking mind. It's my big mind. It's not the mind of yes and no, but it's what lets go of that, maybe, is how I would explain it to myself. So Xin Xin Ming, Ming literally means inscription. So song, song of the trusting mind, song of the heart mind that trusts our original nature. So if you think about our human tendency to control things, and to basically the energy that we spend to get things to come out on our side, basically, and to come out according to our preferences, this is the energy that this teaching is working with. Taoism is so rooted, and this teaching is so rooted in living in accordance with the world as it arises, as I said before, the natural world. And the world of causes and conditions, really, that naturally arise, and meeting them with understanding and not bringing some in and trying to push others away. So there's deep faith in our one mind, but also deep faith in cause and effect, that we can meet each situation, and that each situation has its own ethics, that rather than bring my kind of packaged ideas about how my ethics work and impose them on a situation, to really understand that each situation has its own ethic that's expressed, and so we can move in accordance with the ethics of the situation, rather than putting our commandments or our rules on the situation. And this requires us to keep bringing in a fresh view, keep bringing in a fresh view. When I was thinking about this, the story I remembered that was a teaching of this to me was when I guess it was 2 years. I had a career as a teacher, and I loved my teaching career. And I briefly, at the request of a friend, became a vice principal for 2 years. And that was not particularly a good fit, but I was a vice principal at a junior high. And there was a particular student that I just could not let in my heart. I had such an aversion to dealing with this student, and I knew that it was, really my deep desire and responsibility to meet him. But as good as I was with, the maybe several hundred other students, there was this student that was so difficult for me, and I would literally be coming around the corner in a courtyard and go the other way, because I felt like I didn't know how to meet him. And I basically made a vow that when I saw him, I would remember that it's not the person I saw yesterday. This is not the child I knew yesterday. This is a fresh moment. And all the beliefs and all the resistance that, I would carry forward, I would just put it down, day after day. It was probably a year-long practice. And it really taught me the power of a fresh view. And it was transformational, because really what transformed there was our relationship, how I could relate to him and see him, and therefore how he could relate to me and see me. Bringing in this fresh, open view, letting go of opinions, not being pushed around by attraction and aversion. It's really a deep story. So the emphasis on the experiential and bringing the experience of this fresh moment, and from that acting is a deep teaching of this Shin Ming. The other thing, and this is true of Zen, and it, I think, evolved in early Chan, is that not interested in establishing some truth or in preaching and teaching the truth, but really a way to live with awareness and clarity in the moments that arise for us. And this is actually, if you go to the very early teachings of the Buddha, the same teaching, he said, don't believe what I tell you. You need to discover this for yourself. I want to make a few line-by-line comments of the opening lines that I quoted. So the first one, the great way is not difficult for those who hold no preferences. Preferences, by their nature and definition, are self-referential. Preferences are self-referential. So to not hold those is to make the way not stressful, not difficult. When longing and aversion are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. So when we let go of our reactivity, of being pushed around and triggered by those longings and aversions, everything becomes fresh and we can act appropriately. Again, to the Shin Ming. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, then hold no opinion for or against. The struggle of likes and dislikes is a disease of the mind. When the deep meaning of things is not understood, the mind's essential peace is disturbed, to no avail. And this deep meaning of things is, the non-dual mind. The mind of emptiness, which is not a state as it's presented here, but actually a way of continually letting go of fixed ideas, letting go of preferences, letting go of what we thought we knew. So it's the unobscured arising of life. The way is perfect, like vast space, where nothing is lacking and nothing is extra. Indeed, it is due to our choosing or rejecting that we do not see thus. And this to me is simply things unfolding according to their inherent nature, according to causes and conditions. You know, think of Dogen, fish swim like fish, birds fly like birds. So now to the, excuse me, how, you know, like how do we take these human, heavily conditioned minds and work with letting go to find this kind of balance and to cultivate this faith. So a few specific concrete practices. We practice Zazen. And when we sit, we practice to contact the mind we can trust. So we don't push anything away, and we open to a trust, or cultivating at least a trust in the mind. Another practice is to study our delusion. We have to know and see for ourselves how much we suffer, how much we're bad, you know, like moved around by our longing and our aversion and our struggle of for and against and trying to get things to come out our way. And again, we have to study, observe, accept, let in how our longing and aversion cause suffering for ourselves and other people as well. So we study our delusions. And then also we practice making friends with unwanted circumstances and feelings. This is Frank Ostaseski's teaching of his invitation to welcome everything, push away nothing. Sounds good, is difficult, right? And there's a particular practice that I want to offer for this. I've heard it called compassionate abiding. If you know the practice of Tonglen, it's like the first part of that practice, but you're really practicing loving kindness toward yourself, so that when there's a painful, unwanted circumstance in your life, you can breathe in that discomfort, and then you send out to yourself what would be helpful. And I'll just use a really small example that might make it more real how this works, but it's great to practice with small things. Sometimes we do that in session, you know, we practice with an itch, we practice with a knee that we want to move, but we just practice welcoming it. And the example I want to give is this physical thing that I've been struggling with lately. And I have been struggling rather than embracing, I have to say, that I have some tears in some tendons and in my bicep and my right shoulder. And I just was a very active person. I just turned 72, like day before yesterday. And so, you know, I don't want to not be able to pick up heavy things. I don't want to have sudden movements cause me pain. And I don't want to be sitting with this kind of pervasive pain all the time. So it's definitely this, you know, arising of the thought of, it should be otherwise. I should still be strong. I should be able to fix this. We think that our medical profession should be able to fix everything. And what compassionate abiding looks like in this circumstance is just to breathe in the frustration and judgments and fear. There's some fear there, you know, of losing capacity, to breathe that in on the in-breath, and then to send out ease, to send out loving kindness and patience, and sending it out to myself, so that I'm really just helping myself be with something that's difficult to be with. Compassionate abiding. So it's 6:25. Maybe someday I won't always reach this point in my talk where I look down at the part that I have to not talk about, but I'm at that point, because you can, if you're, or here in front of me, the beautiful residence, or listening from somewhere else, you could take this on as homework, because there's a beautiful parallel also to the Genjo koan, and how to study the way of enlightenment is to study the self, and how to carry the self forward is to carry forward our longing and aversion, but to let the myriad things come forth is to let things become clear and undisguised by not carrying forth that longing and aversion. But I won't say more about that part because I'm almost to the end of my time. There is one thing that I think is really important to bring in here, though, so I'm going to take the time for this, which is when you think of letting go of opinions, going with the flow, it's very easy to put that in the category of everything's cool, there's nothing to be done. And, you know, we care about the world, and we have opinions based on our vows and ethics. And so there's a very important fine distinction there, because it's not to negate our personal and societal ethics and our commitment to acting according to those vows. But really, we need to practice in meeting how we're going to interact with the world and what we care about and how we want to bring good into the world in a way where we're not holding on to our fixed views, in a way that we have the mind that says, okay, this is the way I see this situation in this moment, but not necessarily so. Can I listen? Can I take someone else's perspective and try it on? So I think it's really important to not take this going with things as they are, holding no opinions, to mean that we don't have vows, that we don't have ethics, that we don't care about the world and act in the world. It's just acting, finding the place where our compassionate action, our appropriate action can emerge, that's not from a box of ideas, that's with a flexible mind and a loving mind, and that's and a creative mind, and a mind that can listen and take in other people's points of view. Okay, I vow to not go over time. So I'm going to end with this. You know, we practice with all this, and it's a lifetime, really, of practicing so that we can live in the world according to our vows and serve. So we bring diligence and heart to this. But still, we meet and love the world as it is, and ourselves as we are, and our lives as they are. Even though we work, even though we practice, we could use a little improvement, but we're already perfect, right? It's already perfect. In fact, it's about loving the world as it is and ourselves as they are. So, as I promised one of the residents, I have 2 poems by EQ to end with. Here's the first one. Clouds, endless clouds, climbing beyond. Ask nothing from words on a page. Clouds, endless clouds, climbing beyond. Ask nothing from words on a page. And here's the second one. Don't worry, please, please. How many times do I have to say it? There's no way not to be who you are and where. Don't worry, please, please. How many times do I have to say it? There's no way not to be who you are and where.